Okay, we'll get started here in just a few minutes. We're going to let people get logged in. So you have some people logged in, some questions already in queue. I'm just going to do a quick audio test and we'll make sure everything is kind of working as expected here on my end. I'd like to welcome everyone to our May 12th, 2020 Google Hangout. Just going to check in our feed here really quickly. My name is Greg Ondo. I work with Yamaha Corporation, and I'm actually I work as a Steinberg specialist here in the U.S. So we'll go ahead and I'm just gonna check in our browser and make sure that this is sounding okay. Okay, maybe if a couple people let me know if you could hear me. Okay, I'm just gonna check something quickly here. All right, that looks okay. All right, so how the Hangout will work is we're going to basically, we've had some people that had submitted questions in advance, and we've also had some we have questions that are asked in the comments field. You could ask questions in the comments field. So, and if you want to go ahead, if you're watching this live, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, that's always helpful. If you're not watching this live, we could just you don't have to necessarily introduce yourself. We'll get people logged in. Okay. All right. Thanks for the confirmations. I had to switch browsers real quick. Okay, so we'll let people get logged in. We'll have some questions. So what we do is if you ask a question in a comments field, we will try to take a okay, I'm just reading through comments. So I just want to make so if you ask your question in the comments field, we will go through and try to do it in as chronological order as possible. If you're not watching this live, you may want to just skip ahead maybe till 10 minutes by the time everyone gets logged in throughout the world. We will try to have an index of the Hangout done later tonight. Like many of you, my family is working from home during this time, during our pandemic. So I will inevitably be interrupted by my son. We have him starting a Disney film now. So he's done with his schoolwork for the day. So I'll apologize in advance for interruptions. We also have construction going on next door this morning. There's a lot of kind of little bobcats and noisy construction vehicles, but they seem to be stopped now. And you may hear my wife upstairs. She has conference calls going on as well. So we'll let people get logged in. I see some questions that have already been posted, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Okay, so let's see where we have some people from. Okay, so I have Sir Robert from Atlanta, seeing some questions on importing key commands. Okay. Okay, so I see some questions on back files. All right, so good to see Millard on a Hangout again. He's been a loyal attendee here for the last 2 months or so. Okay, so I see a question on control room in Nuendo and Cubase. It'll work the same way. Okay. Okay, so all right, so just seeing people. So seeing a question: am I still in Alexandria? Yes, we just moved right at the end of last year. We're just a little bit south, but in Fort Hunt in Alexandria, Virginia area, just outside of Washington D.C. If you're not familiar with it. Okay, so you see Robbie from Dallas. Good to see you on. So I was just saying, question or comment. First time joining such a group, we'll probably ask silly questions. It's no problem. Silly questions keeps me employed. All right, so we have Sherman Oaks. Okay, so just seeing. All right, so we have Finland. We have Manchester, West Palm Beach, Netherlands, Oregon, Slovenia, Bavaria, Georgia, West Lafayette, Indiana, Germany. We have Hamburg, where our company is based. All right, so we have Stockholm. We have London, Canada, Ottawa. Kuala Lumpur. All right, Liverpool, Italy, India. Okay, so we have Milwaukee. All right, just lots of people getting logged in. Let's see, Rhode Island, Mexico. All right, so we have Yorkshire, England. Cambodia. All right, so we have Jason from Northern Virginia, someone local to where I am. All right, so we have. All right, so Jason's from Stafford. I just grew up a little bit north of there in Dale City. All right, we have Switzerland. Yotown, I think that's Youngstown. Perhaps. All right, so. All right, so we had Derby, England, Austria, Vienna. Another person from Atlanta, Chicago, Kuwait. All right, good to see you, Greg McCarty from Oregon. All right, we'll get started in about another minute. Looks like our people are kind of getting logged in. Okay, all right, so we have Russia. All right, so we have Vermont, South India. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We have lots of questions, and we had some questions that were mailed in. And if you want to mail questions in advance, you can send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And if you include your email address in the body, I could often just kind of reply directly to you if it's just a quick answer. But okay, so we see first question, how to copy the one project's track groups channel to other projects in maximum group tracks in one project. Thank you from NMS. Okay, so when we want to incorporate a set of group tracks, I believe the maximum number of group tracks we could have in a project is 256. But if we want to import like group tracks from other projects. In 10.5, we added the ability to, if you select file and then import tracks from project, we could now select a different project here. So let's just say I think this one has some groups in it. And now we could, you could just see your different channel types, and you could just select all of your group tracks. You could also import folder tracks. But this within 10.5, we can now just come right over here and just import the group tracks from one project into any other project you like. So if you have your drum bus set up exactly how you want, maybe a vocal bus, guitars, you know, drum set, piano, you can just simply have those all recalled as one single and one mouse click and import those group tracks as you see fit. Okay. So, and I see a question, can you move part of a template to another template? And we could do this the same way. So if you start off with your template, you know, a template is really just a particular audio file. So if I wanted to come here, let me just see. I think I'm, you know, save it as a project. So often what you do is you kind of start off with a project without any media on it. And then at that point, we would choose to save as template. So if we simply save a project instead of the template, what we could do again is go to your import tracks from project, just where we were previously, and come over here, and then you could have all of your different instruments, audio files, groups, routing, all kind of preserved. And you could also choose, if you did have, you know, a media like MIDI parts and audio parts, you could choose not to incorporate the events and parts, and also to exclude automation from one project. So that should give you kind of a clean slate to start with. Okay. Okay, so he says, hey guys, anyone know how to move Logic Pro key commands to Cubase rather than editing them one by one? So if you go to your key commands area under edit, we can just select your key commands, and then you'll see different presets. So here you could load up, I think we have our Logic key commands, Pro Tools, rendering macros, which are some older ones I did, older Cubase key commands, Sonar key commands, etc. So at this point, you could just have your own, you could just, you know, start off by loading up the Logic key commands directly there. Then you won't have to set them one by one. Okay, so we have a question. I know some composers that use templates that are already mixed, ready to record because they simply don't have the time to mix. Could you go through the procedures of saving a template? So once you have everything organized the way you want, and a lot of times when we see kind of orchestral stuff, you may see kind of like, you know, a folder of strings and then a folder of violins, you know, short, long, or if they're doing note expression maps. So kind of the folder hierarchy is very important. But once you have kind of all of your tracks organized, you could just simply come right over here to the file menu and just save as template. And then when you go to a new project, your templates will show up directly here. If you go to the more, these will be kind of pre-done templates that can simplify life. But if you go to more, you could see all of your stored templates will show up there. So once you have everything configured, just simply choose save as template, and that will keep all the routing, your effects, your instruments, your MIDI tracks all kind of set up. So you have a kind of a known starting point. And for a lot of big composers, you know, they're constantly tweaking their templates. They don't have to search for this particular synth sound, or they know that this pad or bell works really well for the particular client. So it's very easy to work with that way. Okay, so we have a question. Please explain how to manage my back files. They're building up. As I save new versions, is it safe to delete the older ones? I've never had to use a back file. Can you show how to load one? I think if you just, just double click on a back file. So the back file, if you're not familiar, is a backup. Some people that have been, sequencing for a long time or, are working with computers for a long time are very keen on doing incremental saves. Like I want to save with today's date, at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and they'll have that. Some people will just have backups. So if you don't, and I think Cubase will keep up to 10 backups, and we could set the backup interval when we go to our general, and we could have autosave on. So if this isn't enabled, at that point, it won't be creating backup files. And we could say every 15 minutes, every 5 minutes, and it's going to be stored directly at the same level as where the project folder is. So if, you wanted to, I know some people will just move all the backups to a particular folder, and will, if they need to recreate, if you're not doing incremental saving, but if you don't need them, you could throw them away. But, generally they could be pretty small. But if, the first, okay, so and it just says, also, if you have 2 back files, you decided to load the first back. Now you close Cubase, you have 3 back files. Does the first back revise become the third? Sorry for the confusion. When you do that, just kind of, you could see the time stamp of when the file was created, and that will give you kind of an indication of the order. So, but if you are confident with how you've saved your files, like when I'm doing hangouts and demos, generally, I always want to start projects from a known location, and I don't have the auto save turned on. But when I'm doing personal projects, I may have it set for every hour or something like that. So it's really just kind of a personal choice and how confident you are with, incremental saving, or when you save it. Some people, want everything to be backed up constantly because they don't save. So it really can matter on your kind of personal workflow. Okay, so it says, when using the transpose feature in the top bar, audio events, is it possible for it to change the pitch, vinyl, turntable style, shortening or lengthening the event instead of time stretch algorithms? It won't necessarily do that from the pitch, from changing in the top bar, but there's a way to do it quite easily. So I'll just do a new project here. And I'll just drag over a drum loop. Just an audio file here. So let's say if I have this audio file here, and there's different time stretch algorithms. So if I change if I come here, we could change it to like one of the elastic algorithms, and we could have this I could select this particular file and place it into musical mode directly here. So let's say I'll just undo a couple of these things here. Okay, so we have this file in musical mode, and now we could just drag it across. So now whatever tempo I adjust here, that will automatically fit. But so our default algorithm will be Elastic Pro time, but if I put this on Elastic Pro tape, now every time I do tempo changes, it'll change the pitch. So if I wanted to come here, let's add a tempo track quickly. I'll just draw in some tempo changes here. So we'll hear the pitch change of the loop to match what an analog tape machine would do. Then we'll just have it speed up, and we'll hear the pitch. So that's how you can kind of mimic like analog tape. So while it's not necessarily the pitch shift algorithm here, but I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but if you place that into musical mode, just kind of switch this and then change the tempo, and then you'll have kind of the exact same functionality like you would on a vinyl turntable or analog tape. Okay, so it says, "Hi, Greg. Thank you for hosting again. I'm writing from New Haven. Would you please do a class on setting up the control room? I'm using Ondo, not Cubase. I'll show it in Cubase because the functionality will really be identical. So when you go to our control room setup, we'll go to our studio, and let's go to our audio connections. And we'll just kind of pull this up, and we could have some different areas here. So I'll just go ahead and delete a couple of things. So let me just remove this. So the control room allows us to use the inputs and outputs of our audio device, of our audio interface, to mimic what the functionality of the control room portion of a large format console is. So if I wanted to switch between different speakers, I could have different speaker configurations, and these could be mono, stereo, 5.1, Dolby Atmos. So let's say I have Yamaha HS7s, I have some JBLs, a Genelex, and let's say if I wanted to add another monitor, I could just add an Auratone. Okay, and then we could choose whether we want this to be mono, stereo, or what channel configuration. And Ondo would have some extended channel configurations. We could also have 4 different headphone or Q mixes. So if I wanted to do Q mixes, I could say, I want this to be our vocals. I wanted this Q mix to be, guitar. Say drum. So as we come over here, and again, what we do is we take the available outputs for our example here for the speakers, and we define which outputs of our audio interface these are going to. And we want our cues to also be routed to outputs. We could have inputs for a talkback microphone. We could also have external inputs. So let's say someone comes over and they want to monitor off their iPad and they wanted to use that as a reference. Or let's say a DVD player, CD player, other computer, whatever. So we could kind of come over here and we have, 6 external inputs, our talkback. We could have a dedicated headphone. And that's more for in the control room. So once we have our inputs and outputs connections defined here, we can now go to your control room setup on the right hand side. So if we wanted to switch between monitors, we could just come right here and switch between your monitors like so. We could also, if we wanted to adjust the levels of each monitor, we could attenuate the level so that as we do switch, that the levels can be independent so that you could have kind of consistency for each monitor that you select. So it won't immediately sound better just because it's it's louder. We could also have each monitor source. So if you wanted to apply EQ or like an analysis plugin, we could do that directly here in our monitor source. But, one of the main intentions of the control room is, we would get this call a lot in our support department where people would do a mix and all of a sudden they have their master fader down really low. And then when they exported their mix down file, it was kind of, weak sounding volume wise. So this way we could keep our gain structure here, but the monitoring level, the big red knob, is just set up for our monitoring. And we could set up a dim function. We could also have a known reference level. So if I just kind of hold down I could hold down the Alt or Option and click, and we could now just come there and set up our known reference level. We could also have the click track. If we now wanted to come over here and communicate with our different vocals in our Q mixes, we could see all of our Q mixes set up here. So this way we could talk back and be routed through the MixConsole for all of our Q mixes. So if the guitar player didn't want to hear a click track, but everyone else did, the vocalist, you didn't want the click going into their headphones, you could do stuff like that. We could also have your external inputs. So if someone's bringing in a DVD as a reference, or Blu-ray, or an iPad, or a 2-track analog, we could just monitor our mix, the external reference, and be able to have a kind of full communication with them. So there's a lot of great things you could do with the control room. And the functionality is going to be identical between Cubase and Ondo. So, okay, so we have a question. Does the sampler track have LFOs to modulate the filter parameters? So I don't think it has built-in LFOs. It's kind of intended to be just kind of a very quick, simple sampler. But if you wanted to, you could assign these to different slots on your quick controls, and then once you have the sampler track, you could as soon as I come here, we have our sampler track that you should be able to, let me just go to like a MIDI insert, and you could just go to your auto LFO plugin and be able to adjust parameters that were mapped to quick control. So it doesn't have it natively within the sampler track itself, but you could just simply do it through quick controls and the auto LFO plugin. Okay, so I see a question. Spectre does not give me the option to learn MIDI when right-clicking. I get a add to quick control set. What's the difference between the two? So we could have our quick controls kind of set up here. So let's go to our studio setup. And if I wanted to have VST quick controls, I could have kind of 8 go-to parameters for track quick controls. And we can think of this for audio or for VST quick controls. So I'll just kind of assign this, and we could just move, different parameters, click on learn, and then we could just move the various parameters here. So let's say if I wanted to assign that function to this controller, I select quick control 2, then I could assign that, etc. So now that I've assigned my quick controls, we could go to our instruments like Spectre here. And now I could just say I wanted to add this to quick control slot 7 or 8. So now I could just adjust when I come to my track quick controls here. You could just have these automatically control the quick controls and control the different parameters. So we can think of quick controls as kind of 8 go-to parameters for different instruments. So, at that point, you could just assign the different parameters to, quick control functions. And then you could have kind of 8 set to go faders or knobs on your MIDI controller and be able to adjust those parameters that you want to. So usually the quick controls for all the Steinberg instruments will kind of be default to the relevant ones, but you could come over here and again just change as you see fit. Okay, so it says when using render in place, can you render to mono? So if we have a mono source, it could be kind of different answers whether you're doing audio or MIDI information. So most of the MIDI information is going to be coming out of a stereo out. So the source itself will be stereo. But if we wanted to do audio and it'll kind of maintain that source, you could do some other stuff after. But let's say if I wanted to, render in place these particular sections here, I could just come over here, go to edit for an audio track, and we could choose render with current settings. And I'll just abort that because, sorry. All right. So when I go to my render in place, what I want to do is to go to my render settings. And if I have this set to dry or channel settings, that will maintain the width. But if it's going through like a stereo effects channel or the stereo master out, that will then turn it into stereo files based on the output routing. So if I wanted to have this as one event, I could just now say render and take that mono file and be able to turn that directly into another mono file and have the pre-existing track muted. But with virtual instruments, if they're set to a stereo output, which most of them will default to, you may have to, do a mono submix afterwards. Okay. Okay, so it says, "Hi Greg, thanks for all your help. Is there any way to detect what musical note would work with an audio loop? I want to add a layer from a VST and want to make sure it sounds musically right." It's depending on the loop itself. So if it's a monophonic source, like if it's a bass line, let me just see if I can find one quickly here. So, if we have like just a quick something melodic like this bass part here that's monophonic, you could go into the sample editor and go to Vary Audio, and this could kind of tell you what pitches these notes are. But if it's going to be kind of a polyphonic thing with chords or a lot of drums, your best bet would probably be when doing a VST instrument is just to kind of use your ears and actually kind of just play along. So you could kind of determine pitch on some loops if it's kind of a monophonic based thing with the Vary Audio and kind of use that as a basis. But, just because it shows you what the basis is, you may play completely different notes and kind of create something more interesting. So I would say the best thing to do is kind of use your ear, and if it sounds good, it's good. All right. Okay, so it says, "Hi Greg, hope you're doing well." We're doing great, thanks. Could you please show me how to use the Arpache at 120 BPM to create arpeggiated analog bass patterns in Retrolog, and how to use Arpache to make melodies? Thanks. Okay, so let's go take a look. Go back to this project here. Okay, so let's go ahead and just drag over a Retrolog. Okay, this probably already has an arpeggio on it, but let's go ahead and just shut it off. So let's say I just have a simple synth bass line. I'll now come over here to my MIDI inserts, and let's go to like Arpache. And I could just kind of come over here. So say I want 16th notes. So you could just kind of hold down a chord. And if you wanted to adjust kind of, some of the parameters of Arpache, you could kind of come here and say you want the length to be shorter. And once you have this done also, I could play one chord here. And if I enable the record option within the plugin at this point, I could just so at that point you could, instead of having to record everything will kind of automatically be arpeggioed out for you. So there's a number of different ways. And once you kind of get into, some of the arpeggios, there's different, you could change the play order of them. So if you say, I just want it to go down or up, or to go down then up, or up then down, or random. Then you get some interesting results doing like, triplets against dotted. So that should be able to get you started. And, a lot of times people may not do may not do melodies so much with arpeggiators, but, you can definitely kind of do whatever you want. So that should give you an idea how to use some of the Arpache MIDI plugins with Retrolog. All right. Okay, so let's just going through. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay. So it says, hello, hi, I cannot sync Cubase tempo to my Korg Kronos, maybe Kronos or Korg PA1000. Please help. So probably what you want to do is within your Korg is you probably want Cubase to send MIDI clock so that the MIDI tempo information is being sent. So if we go to your transport menu, so if you wanted to sync like another hardware keyboard, try going into your project synchronization setup. And then you could, when you come, you could just say, we want to do MIDI clock. destinations, and then you could say this is where my Korg Kronos is set up, or my PA 1000. You just simply set that up, and at that point it'll send MIDI clock data out directly to your directly to, and you could just have it follow the, you could activate these. So and at that point, when you hit play, it's going to send MIDI clock out to your Korg, and if your Korg is set to listen to external clock, or to receive MIDI clock, you need to probably set that up in that particular mode. But that's what you need to do in Cubase to have your Korg keyboards kind of synchronize tempo for arpeggios and different functions within their sequencers. Okay. Okay, so as you see, I'd like to know how to convert acoustic drums to MIDI. A link will help. All right, so if we wanted to do that easily, let's take a look. And this is kind of a great feature for when you maybe get a drum recording that you're not so enthralled by the drum sound. So say if we have something. And I wanted to do like drum replacement. So, and I could do this with any MIDI device. So what I want to do is I have just an instance of Groove Agent loaded up here. And this could be to any hardware drum machine, any software drum machine. So I'm going to just select that particular track. I will go to my kick track and go to hit points. And let's say even kind of while it's playing. So double click here, select the hit points tab, and I want to basically find the rhythmically significant points of the file. So I'll just kind of come here and look at it visually. So we're playing. So this way I don't want to capture over bleeding, but I want to come over here and we'll say create MIDI notes. And I will, before I do that, I just want to select this particular sound. I think I may have a preference set up. Let me just change one preference here. So under editing, let me just find this one preference here because I have it where the track is automatically following. Okay, so I'll just say track selection. I'm going to uncheck track selection follows event selection. And that's the default behavior. So if I come here, I can see that we'll have all of our different drums here. So what I want to do is to just, as we're playing along, go to my kicks and create MIDI notes. And I want to retain the original dynamics and say I want this to be on C1 and I want it to be on the first selected track. So now it's created this MIDI part automatically. So if I mute my 3 kick tracks, it's now just firing off the Groove Agent. So if I want to make this kick a little louder. And I could do kind of the same for the snare as well. So just come over here. So do hit points. And create MIDI notes from those hit points. And this I want it to be D1. Hit OK. So again, I can mute. And have both of them play at the same time, just kind of augment it. So without... So a very easy way to turn acoustic drums into MIDI that you could trigger various samples from quite easily. Okay, so while we're here on Groove Agent, says, does Groove Agent have a phase flip button for samples on each pad? I don't think so, but we'll go ahead and just kind of take a listen to here. You know, what I've seen some people do if they need it to, if they're concerned about the phase, is once they go into the main sample editors, is at this point just make sure that you could zoom in to, let's say, just the start of the particular sample, and then you could choose kind of different start positions. So if you wanted to just pick exactly where the sample started. So if you wanted to just, you know, have that start there as opposed to there, you're in essence kind of flipping the phase. So, and you could audition that quickly while it's playing if you hear any phase cancellations. Okay. So, all right. So we'll move on. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a simple way to take a MIDI part recorded in piano style and split it out to individual single note MIDI parts to then assign to orchestral instruments? You know, this could be kind of a bit of an art form to do it. Let's just see if I come here. Let's see if we come up with a quick, easy way. You know, there's some easy things that might help, depending, and it could really depend upon the part itself. So just get this loaded up, and let's look at, like this might be a pretty good. What did you say? So if I wanted to take that piano part and we go to MIDI, let me just... and choose dissolve part. You could separate the pitches. And if you want to dissolve them to lanes, we could do that as well. So now, let's see if it put it at the bottom. So we could see kind of these broken out here. So this will kind of separate it by pitches. And I think that there's a way sometimes within the score editor, but you know, what I see a lot of people do is, let's, you know, come here and say I just have kind of a blank part, you know, and it's one of these things that you might just have to do a bit more manually. So let's say if I wanted to edit those two events, I could just, you know, select this line here, copy, and if I go to a blank part here, you know, we could just choose to paste that, you know, so you could actually switch between, let me just see if I, so I'll just go into the editor here again. And let's say I have nothing, and then you could choose to paste the events. You could have like the two events open simultaneously. Let me just try that. So if I have both the parts selected, we could choose to kind of edit the active part only. So if you say I just wanted to come to this, so you could copy from, one particular part here. And then there's even key commands that you could just paste directly into, so a lot of people will do that and, do the, so like when you do the paste, there's also, the paste at origin function. So I know a lot of composers will just say, okay, I want, these two notes to be on, I want to copy these notes here. And then you could have multiple editors open, obviously. But if I just wanted to come here and let's paste, I'll just do a quick paste at origin, and this would automatically keep the same exact positioning of those notes in time so that you could work that way. But, I think if you kind of work with multiple parts, it's a fairly fluid thing to kind of cut, copy, paste. And if you wanted to split each individual voice, and I think we may see I've seen some discussion where, you might be able to have some more artificial intelligence stuff with that, maybe in the future. So, but you could, very easily cut, copy, paste. That's what many film composers do currently. And they really kind of like starting with a piano score and find that the orchestration works much better starting that way and just using copy and paste from origin. Okay. Okay, just going through. We're still having people introduce themselves. Thanks for all the great comments. It's always fascinating to see people from all over the world. Okay, it says, hey, Greg, I'm having an issue with ARA and Melodyne on Windows. When a track has Melodyne extension added on a clip, I can't then record to the same track without audio dropouts. When you kind of sometimes work with ARA extensions, one of the things that you may want to do, so let's say if I'm here and we want to go to, your extensions, I don't have Melodyne, but let's say if I want to do something with Spectral Layers here, we could just automatically do kind of our spectral editing, and this would, it could be, once you're kind of done with the editing, try going to your audio and doing a bounce selection. And then that will kind of embed all of the different files, and that may free up some of the system resources that you're running, that you may be seeing when you're running Melodyne in the background. So I would try to see if you get to the point, if you just, once you're done editing for that very specific thing, if you also wanted to come over here and, from the audio, just select it, once you're done with the extension, and see if that kind of helps. I could play around with it more. I have it on my home computer and see if I run into something similar. Okay. Okay, so it says, question, I've been trying to create MIDI device panels. Is there a repository of pre-made panels for MIDI devices? Can you show how they are made? I haven't done this in a long time, so let me just... there used to be some MIDI device panels that were available that came, I think, maybe in version 8 or 7, when they were kind of revamped a bit, but I haven't really seen them, so I'm not sure why it's not included. So when we go to our MIDI device manager, we could come over here and we could say, let's install a device. And I think there used to be like a really good one for like a 1080. So now at this point, I could choose like where this particular device is connected to, and then kind of open the device and add different panels. So you could have it be kind of set for the inspector or channel size and hit OK, drag over, different dots. And at this point, you could align, different buttons and different functions. And these would allow you to do, when we wanted to, say this is for channel, we could, add, so we could have this show up in the inspector. But if we wanted to, so we could have that for particular channels, and then we could decide what type of parameter we want to use with it, what controller we want, what range we want it to be. This hasn't been a aspect of the program that's been probably updated in a long time. There's not a lot of people that are, doing, creating their own kind of, in the old days, this was called like mixer maps. But I could play around with it and see if I come up with more of a workflow maybe for the next Hangout. But that'll kind of get you started with it. Okay. Okay, just seeing a question from Robbie Bowling. Is there a definitive list of all the keyboard shortcuts? I don't think that there's. I think I've seen some on different websites that has all the keyboard shortcuts, but it could kind of fluctuate from version to version as well as new functions are added. But I will see if you want to email me, Robbie. You have my email address. I'll see if I could find I'm pretty sure there's a PDF floating around I've seen on some Facebook Cubase groups with all the different keyboard shortcuts, the default ones at least. Okay, so we have a question. Can you tell me what to do? What do you make? Can you tell me what do you make chord track to melody? The chord track isn't going to be like a melody generator. So if you wanted to, let's do like just a new project here. And let me just add a chord track. And I'll just quickly add VST instrument. All right, so I'll just. Okay, so now when I wanted to, come directly over here and we start entering in chords, I could just say. So if I have my chord track entered in here, I'll just, I could take those particular chords and drag them down, and that will make kind of our chords into parts, but it's not going to like instantly make a melody. And it's not really kind of the intention of it. But you can get a basis of, obviously the, best melodies will consist of chord tones generally and some variations. So that will give you an idea of exactly, what pitches that you may want to make from that. And, you could do stuff like, okay, I just want it to, draw in some different notes, and see what notes are makes sense. And once you have this, also you have different coloring options. So you could say I want to color notes within a chord. So if you are kind of want to write melodies in with your mouse, like if you hold down the option key, you could see which notes are in key, whether it's green is within the scale, blue or green is within a chord, blue is within a scale, and a red note. Let me just come here. So, and if you have a red note, that will fall, and that's out of key. So you can kind of tell by colors and then kind of write notes that way. But it's not really kind of taking the chord track and having it create a melody, if that's what your question is. Okay. Okay, so I see a question. Is there any way to configure multiple audio interfaces using the control room? So the control room functionality is really going to be using like your particular audio interface. If you're running the Mac platform, you can do an aggregate device. There are some limitations and concerns about that overall. But when you start defining your inputs and outputs, and this is where kind of having an audio interface with more outs and ins can make a big difference. So, you know, once we start having this, so if you have like an interface that has ADAT expansion capabilities, like, you know, I'm running, like in my personal studio, I still have like the Steinberg MR816 interfaces, and I use the ADAT in and out of those to get, you know, more. I use the 8 analog outputs for stereo and a 5.1 monitoring setup. I use another set of ADAT converters to get external instruments and effects directly into my system as well. So, you know, it makes sense. And, you know, sometimes you may think, oh, it's just easy to run multiple interfaces, but the problem gets to be, you know, when we're clocking, sorry for hitting the microphone, but when we're clocking those devices, if they're not in sync with each other, that adds to a lot of potential like huge issues where your audio drifting out of sync constantly. So if you want to utilize kind of all the capabilities of control room, you know, try getting an audio interface that has enough analog inputs and outputs or the ability to expand to accommodate that. Okay, so we see a question from Dave Glick. Good to see you on the Hangout, Dave. It says, how do you choose the voices when generating harmonies? Can you change them after being generated? Stay safe. Good to see you, Dave. He normally comes to our Club Cubase in DC. That's kind of been postponed as all the stores are closed in the area, but it's good to see you on a Hangout. So let's just jump to this. So if we know kind of what the chords are from the particular, so we have our chord track here, and I'll just activate this project quickly. So when we start doing our generate harmonies, so if I wanted, I'm left here for 1,000 years and a day. So let's say on that phrase right there, and a day. So I will just select that little clip there, and I'm going to go to my audio and say generate harmony voices. So we'll just say, let's give it like maybe 2 harmony voices. And we'll come here, and I'll just kind of drop the volume of these slightly because they're going to be kind of more in the background. So now as we listen. So and this will do it as soprano and alto, but if we go to our chords, at this point, we could just switch. So if I say I want that to be a tenor and this to be an alto, and now when you play it back, so you could just kind of switch directly here. So there's alternate voicings as well. So you could have soprano, alto, tenor, bass, an SATB, and an alternate SATB. But if you say, you know, I want this here to be alto or tenor or bass, and the next one to be tenor, you know, you could just kind of change those voices directly there. So I think that'll help you out. So that's how you could switch the voices after generating harmonies. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to undo the mixer settings and fader knobs while editing, and also select some of the tracks and adjust the faders without a VCA link? Can you explain more on the special features in the mixer? So there's about 18,000 special features in the mixer, so I may shy away from that, but I'll show you how to undo mixer changes. So let's say as we're working here, we may notice that a lot of times as we're kind of noodling around the mixer, I may adjust so say I kind of destroyed my mix. So if I hit Alt or Option Z instead of Control or Command, this would undo all the settings in the mixer. And I could hit Alt Shift Z to redo. So, and we could also just kind of, if we have your on-screen mixer here, we could scroll back through all of your mixer changes. If we have it in the large MixConsole, we could see kind of our undo history in the upper left-hand corner. So as I adjust, and anytime I adjust a parameter here, so say I flip the phase, I can now just kind of scroll right back and be right back to where I was. So that's, you know, you could see every little change you make here in the MixConsole history. So as soon as you kind of come over here and adjust, you know, different parameters, those will all show up. And that's even changing plugins, you know, changing plugin parameters, all that. We can just come right over here and just say I didn't like any of those changes, and it'll be a linear undo history, which it really kind of needs to be once you start doing that. And, you know, as soon as we go back, you're right to exactly where you were. So, and there's a second part of the question, while editing, and also select some tracks and adjust the faders without a VCA link. So if you have a number of different tracks, and I'll just kind of show this maybe in our project where there's more audio stuff. So let's say if we go to the mixer, there's this little thing that you could activate called Q-Link. So I could select all these tracks. So if I click kind of in the fader area, and if I want to take all my drums, you could activate Q-Link, and we could also do this by Alter Option plus Shift. This is like super handy function. So if I wanted to just increase all these, I could just activate Q-Link here, or just hold down Alt Option plus Shift, and then I could just group all these different elements together. So now I could move them, move one independently, hold down Alt Option plus Shift, and I could just do like a quick link. So that way you don't have to assign it to a group or to a VCA fader or set up a permanent link. So it's a very handy thing to know. All right, so question, can you show how to clone your Cubase settings to another computer? Is it enough to do a profile export and import this to the new computer? Yes, that's really kind of the intention once you have the profile set up. So if you have like, all of your user presets, plugin presets, just about, like all of your preferences, key commands, and you want it to go to someone else's studio and they have everything kind of, because Cubase could be super customized for each person. We can now just kind of come right over here and just go to your profile manager and export your profile. And at that point you could, email it to the client or someone else or to yourself or put it on a thumb drive. When you go to open up their Cubase, import it, then restart, and all the preferences and key commands will automatically take. So that's really all you have to do is just to save a profile. So, if you're like worried about having to copy independent files and individual files, you don't necessarily have to worry about that. All you have to do is really just save it as a profile when you move to a new machine, and you could kind of start off with the same kind of user experience that you had. All right, so let's go in. Okay, so we have Sweden checking in. It's always good. Austria, Vienna checking in. Always wanted to go there. Okay. All right, so we have, Chicago, Kuwait, Oregon. All right, so project patch info, not auto setting external keyboard roll-in patch, how to toggle inspector patch on one and another to back to toggle. I think we may have covered this in a previous Hangout, but let's say I think we may have our, let's go to my MIDI device manager, and I think you're doing this like maybe with an XP80, if memory serves. So if we go to your MIDI device manager, so let's say I have a 1080 and I have it set here, and I have a MIDI track. So I will just come over here, and this way I could say I just want to go to my JV 1080, and this is routed out to my Nectar MIDI control panel, to my MIDI interface. I could see I click here, and then I could see all of my patch banks and select my patch banks. And I think what you're running into is that the patch bank wasn't really taking and then you'd have to kind of knock it up one and down one. So if we wanted to do this, if I have that particular patch bank, this is what I would do is, and I look at this part, I double click, and we go to our MIDI list editor, and then it's going to be empty. There's no data in it. But once I have this, so this will set it up so when you start to play, this program change gets sent before. But you may want to try embedding this program change. And a quick, easy way to do that is once you have the patch selected, is to go to your MIDI menu and just choose to freeze MIDI modifiers. That will then take that patch. And now when we go to our list editor, if I did everything correctly, let me just say I have a note or two in here. And we'll take a look at this, and I think we'll see just see if, so that should, and I think I may have it filtered out, but see if that will, so that will write the program change in the event. So let's come over here, and I'll just see, we may have that filtered out from view in the list editor. Okay. So, but once you just have that patch selected, try going to the freeze MIDI modifiers. So, and I'll just go ahead and erase this event here. So I'll just have kind of a blank part. And we look at, there's no controllers that are activated. So, and then come here, select a patch, freeze MIDI modifiers, and then we'll see that our program change will be written in. So give that a try, because I haven't seen it where it's off by one, and I actually hooked up my old 1080 just to see. But and it could be maybe like the patch script is off by one, but it seems like how you described it in your email to me earlier that it should be kind of working. But try actually just doing the freeze MIDI modifiers. Okay, so I'm just seeing, hi Greg, can you show us how to upload tracks from Cubase to SoundCloud? I think there used to be in earlier versions, and I think we kind of dropped support for it. But when you would do like an export audio mix down, there was an after exports, I think maybe 9 and 9.5. That there is a post process. You could try this, but if you do a mix down, I don't have a SoundCloud account. But see if once you do your stereo mix down, if now on the after export process, that it's you could try the upload to SoundCloud. But I thought maybe it might have been discontinued, but it's really just doing your mix down, taking that file and uploading it to SoundCloud. But so try that in the file, export audio mix down, file export to audio mix down, and then after export, and see if you have the upload to SoundCloud option there. Okay. All right, just had my timeline jump way ahead. Bear with me for a second. Thanks for all the great questions. And if you've learned a tip or trick, feel free to go ahead and give the Hangout a thumbs up. Okay, just let me scroll, find my place again. Okay, so it says, although Cubase positions itself as a music production system, I plan to use it as an audio production for film, so I want to import lots of sound effects from CD. Is there a shortcut to import from lots of CD libraries, which I already have, rather than record in from audio the 1,000+ sounds? So if you have CDs like audio, it could really depend on if it's an audio CD or a data CD. So if it's an audio CD, you could come over here and go to import audio CD, and this would take all the tracks from your audio CD, and you could choose what folder that it will go to. I mean, I think the Redbook audio CD may have a limit of 100 tracks. I could be mistaken. But that's just kind of a limitation of that. If it's just going to be audio files that are on like a data CD or data DVD that you would import into the computer, all you'd have to do is, just import audio files, and you could, just go directly to where your CD or DVD drive is and copy that over. Once you have those set up, you could go to your media menu to MediaBay. And, if you have them all going to a particular folder, you could come over here and say, I really liked, this particular folder. So let's say I just wanted to look at, like let's say the online music foundry stay home. I just downloaded all those. So what I could do is actually just kind of say, okay, I copied it over to this folder, and then you could just choose to rescan disk, and that will automatically scan that particular folder if you wanted to. And if it's like, you have, and especially if you're doing like film work, it's very common to have like, your sound effects library is like, so essential to you. Here we could actually just right click on the folder once you have that and click on add favorite and just call it, SFX, my gems, whatever. And now when you go to your MediaBay on the right hand side, we could just go to favorites, and then you could just see all of your different folders that will be organized here, so you have kind of very fast access to them, so you don't have to record them in as audio. So that way the metadata, so you could search for it, would all be kind of handled through MediaBay. Okay, so we have a question. Is it possible to set defaults for quick controls for every new channel? So if I have the same assignments, volume pan, etc., and how to assign MIDI keyboard buttons to on-off filters and EQ bands on channel. So if you kind of work with a template, which is a good thing to do, you could come over here. Let's say I'll just adjust this here. So I come here, I could go to my quick controls, and then you could have track quick controls. So a lot of people may start with a template, and you can say, I want my volume and panning here. And you could have that set up for, any number of tracks. So if you're doing like a new project, and let's say if you didn't do it, all you'd have to do is say, okay, I want an audio track, and I'll do one audio track, and I wanted my quick controls for volume pan here. And then we could choose to duplicate, and we could kind of do this a number of times. So then I could select these two, duplicate tracks, select these four, let's make it into 8, select these 8, make it into 16, select 16, and then you could have 32 tracks. Now, if you wanted to rename these in an intelligent way, just double click on one of the fields and then hit the tab key, and then you could rename. But now every track will have those quick controls set up very easily. And to control these, and there's other kind of presets as well. So you could just say I wanted EQ band, 1 and 4. So if you wanted to configure these, there's different presets, but you could also make your own presets. So you could say, I wanted volume pan, I want sends 1 and 2, I wanted, one band of EQ, I wanted phase, and pre. You could have those 8 go-to parameters. And then when you go to your studio setup, you could go to your track quick controls and just do a learn function and just tell it what particular function that you want. And this could be a button. So if you want it, EQ on and off, hit a button, just learn that button from your controller, and it will capture that MIDI message. And then you could have, very fast access to all your quick controls. Okay, so see a question. Why is Cubase 10 crashing in macOS Catalina? Last version with a fold report by Enable Control Room. I could send a report by email, please, solution. So with Catalina, you have to make sure that all your different components and audio interfaces are all kind of Catalina compliant. If you want to send me a crash report, you could email it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. But I'm running Mojave. It's just what our IT department at Yamaha won't allow us to have Catalina for all sorts of issues. But if you want to email that to me, I'll be happy to pass it on again at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, so we'll move on. At times, when I load up a kick sample, the pitch changes on its own for the first sample. I'm not able to recall fix for the same. Okay, so I'll just reread this, make sure I understand. So at times when I load up a kick sample, the pitch changes on its own for the first sample. I'm not able to recall the fix for the same. I haven't really run into that. Anytime that I have, different samples, so say if I wanted to come to my loops here, I could just say, let's get to kicks. So say if I come here, drop that in. And let's just copy that a couple times. So I think it's going to be same pitch. So let's try just replacing it. And this is a good handy tip if you want to replace like all the kicks that are being used. If you drag over a new sample and hold down the shift key, you can now just replace that sample. And now we'll replace all the different samples. So if it's a change in pitch, I wonder if maybe if it's done like a sample rate conversion. So check and make sure that it's the same sample rate of the sample that you're importing. So okay, questions. Is there a way to preview samples fast in Groove Agent? I've been using Cubase for about 3 months before I used FL Studio, and the preview in FL Studio is pretty fast. Thanks for great work. Okay, so let's say I have an instance of Groove Agent here. Okay, and I'll just try this. Okay, so this is like a beat agent kit here. So if I wanted to just take, say, that kick sample, I could select that kick there. Come over here and we see this little folder. So now I could just say instruments. And I'll just say kick drums. And now I could just kind of hit the down and then enter. And then you could just audition different samples. It's pretty easy, I think. So again, just kind of select the pad and then click here on the little folder arrows, and then you could quickly audition different samples, I think. Okay, so we have watching from Houston, Texas. Thanks for all you do for us Cubase users. You're welcome. I'm glad to be able to help. I'd recorded a vocal. How can I quantize the vocal audio according to my metronome tempo? If it's changed, so let's say if I just, if you've recorded a vocal at one tempo, so let me just see if I could, I'll just import tracks from a project here. Sorry, you may hear my son's Disney movie in the background here. All right, let me just. I'll just try all these vocals here real quick and see if we have. I'll just drag one over from here. Okay, so I'll just kind of drag. I'll just switch this file here. So once you have like what the tempo is of the original vocal, it's going to be pretty straightforward to do. So I'll just revert this quickly because I probably destroyed it. So, the secret is just making sure that, like if as you record the vocal, it's going to have kind of its original timestamp. And I'll just duplicate this just to make it a little easier for demonstration purposes. And I'll make this into one file. So I think I have everything MIDI except for the vocal here. So if I go to look at the vocal in our pool window, we could see that, we're going to have, all of our pool files here. And then these will all be kind of roughly the same tempo map here. So we want to have this tempo stamp. And once you have that tempo stamp, really all you have to do is to place that into musical mode. What did you say? So say I want it to be 110. You wished it all away. Then it's gonna. And I'm left here for 1,000. So say I want to do 86 beats a minute. So, make sure all your tracks are in musical mode. And then once you have kind of like an origin tempo, and you could see that by going into your pool window here. And once you have that kind of origin tempo, you place that into musical mode. And you can do that in the pool or just by selecting a file and you see this little squiggly line. Then it will kind of automatically tempo map to whatever tempo you have in your project. All right, so just going through some of the comments. Thank you. Okay, so just seeing a question. Cubase 10 Pros, does Cubase Pro 10 seems to record tracks into the DAW earlier than it should, just the opposite of latency. Is there anything that could be done to prevent that? So if you're recording, depending on make sure sometimes people will have a lot of plugins on the master bus. And if you do that, try to just, if you go to the lower left-hand corner here, try toggling the constrained delay compensation. So you could do that directly there. So if you see that enabled, so try just clicking there. And I think also another place to look, if you're seeing it kind of record a little bit ahead of time, I think it's about 85%, I would say there. But you could also, check to make sure that you have when you go to your studio menu to studio setup, select the VST audio system and make sure that you have adjust for record latency checked as well. So those are the two settings I would check, and I think that will fix it for you. Okay, question, Greg. Is it possible to freeze group tracks, or is there some workaround? I'm using many plugins on group tracks, and that would help to reduce CPU usage. So if you're doing group tracks, since there's no actual data on a group, if we have, let's say, I'll just jump to in our project that we could have some groups active on. All right, so let's come over here. I'll just revert this quickly. So, the groups themselves don't have an actual part. So, but what you could do is just export the group. So if I have, for instance, all my drums in a group here, so I could select all my drum tracks, right click, and we'll add a group track to the selected channels. Okay, and I'll make it a stereo group. So now, if I wanted to, we could take all these up here, do the quick link like we showed earlier, and I could just adjust the volume of my groups here. So I could take all my drums and adjust the volume. And let's say you have lots of processing going on there. And if you want to save your CPU usage, you could just, when you do an export audio mix down, you could just choose your group here and then import that. Hang on just one second. I think the movie's over. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to get a new movie started. I'll be right back. Sorry. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. All right, we have movie number 2 up for my son. So now I'm going to just go to my channel selection. We're going to select our groups. And at this point, I'm going to go to, we want to create a new audio track and just choose to export the audio file. And this will just kind of take the group track here and render all of that together. And then as we listen to this, if I did everything correctly, that's just our group, our drums in the group. So if you needed to render your groups, we could do that quite easily just by doing the export audio mix down and selecting the groups. So while it's not freezing, you can't freeze anything because there's no data within the group. So, but that will get you there in the same way, and plus with all of your effects. Okay, so we had a question, discuss normalizing options and settings in master channel before exporting. It could really depend. There's going to be kind of different schools of thought on this. Some people like to make everything kind of as hot as possible to be competitive. Some people want to leave stuff a bit more, to leave a little bit of room if they're taking it to like a professional mastering scenario. So a lot of times, all right, so, when we want to, so like, let's say I just exported this particular drum track option here. So I did my mix down on it. And if I wanted to, make this louder, you could, kind of, adjust your gain to get more gain if needed. If you're, and also depending on kind of what your delivery format is. So if you go to your direct offline processing, if you wanted to, for this, there's, once you have that kind of done, you could, and just make sure I'm, all right. So, depending on like your gain structure, and you could get a good idea of the gain probably before you do the mix down, just by seeing what's going on in your meters here. So you could look at loudness metering. And there will be different kind of metering scales. But one of the big ones that you want to deal with is loudness metering. So if you want it to get played, if you're streaming it to, Spotify or Amazon Music, I think they tend to go with -14 as their current thinking for loudness units of where you want to be. But if you're doing broadcast, you probably want a loudness unit measurement of around -23. So you could do that. But once you have something that's done, you may have to kind of set different levels for different delivery formats. So if you go to your audio and, you could go directly to your processes, and one of them is going to be normalized. So if you did something that was a little under, you could normalize by, your maximum peaks in dB, but also in 10.5, you could choose for this to normalize based on -23, loudness units, or -14 LUFS if you wanted to. So, depending on where you're sending it to, I know people that will master differently for broadcasting, and then, have different levels for like streaming music services. So that's a couple of different options to be aware of, but it's okay to do your mix down. If it's a little under, that's fine. You could normalize it up. And now at 10.5, you have the normalizing to loudness units as well. Okay, so I see a question. Do I know when the next Nuendo update will be? I think it's kind of currently in testing, so they haven't announced the shipping date for it. So often they don't announce it until it's pretty ready. So, but I know that they're working on it. So, okay, so we see a question from Robbie Bowling. Is there a difference between a group channel and an effect channel. So in essence, they're very, very similar. I would say they're 99% the same. So if I wanted to send, but the one thing that can make it a little easier is, if I wanted to send a group channel and I wanted to send all these to a reverb, I could just simply select all the channels here. It's like all my drums, and I say, okay, I just wanted to add an effects channel. I'll just add an effects channel to those selected channels. And then I could choose, okay, I want a reverb, and I'll just choose my Revelation reverb. So now when I come over here, I could have that reverb going to different amounts. Now, if I create a group track, like here, I could also, I could kind of do a very similar scenario where I could take these groups here, right click, and then take the channels rather, and I could add a group track and then add an insert of the effects channel. And it would be, I could get to the same place, but the effects channel is a little quicker. And it used to be in previous versions that you couldn't pan independently group channels, but I think in version 9.5 or 10, that distinction went away. So they're very, very similar in that regard. Okay. Okay, so just seeing a question. Question, are the files also automatically stored and saved? Let me see if this is maybe in conjunction with another question. Is from Pearl Austin. So if you have the autosave, and maybe this is in lieu of in regards to our discussion about that. So the files will be saved, as you record the audio, it's saved to the hard disk. But if you have in your preferences set up to, just go to my preferences here, and go to general. And then if you have, so I will just set this up. If you have the auto save set, it will save the project file consistently. Okay, so we have a question. Can you please show how to sidechain the bass and drums for dance music? Can Arpache be sidechained? And if the answer is yes, can you please show how to use it for creating pulsing dance music? Arpache is just like a MIDI arpeggiator, so that's not necessarily something that would respond to a sidechain. But let me just open up a project where I have this kind of set. Sorry for some of the construction noise going on in the back if you hear it, or my son is enjoying his film as well. It's a Disney day today outside for my son. With the pandemic, he's going to go through the whole Disney Plus channel catalog, I think. All right, so let's take a look at, we'll have some side chaining set up here. Okay, so when we want to do side chaining, let's say I have, like in typical EDM stuff, we'll have like kick and maybe a bass or a synth that we want. So if I have, and I just have audio sources here. So if I want to sidechain compress the bass via the kick drum, what I could do is I could just go to this channel and I'll go to its compressor, and I could do this directly from the channel strip or third-party plugins, or just as an insert. and I'll activate the sidechain. Once that sidechain is activated here, click just to the right. And now at this point, we could choose what our input is. And in this track, it's going to be this one. So at this point, when we hit play, this will now automatically, the kick will set the sidechain. So that's really all you have to do. Now, if your instrument is, if you have a MIDI device, like a MIDI bass, you could set the output of that going through a MIDI plugin to the Arpache plugin, and then you could still sidechain in the same way. I just have kind of an audio source here, but it's the same exact principle. So the Arpache arpeggiator isn't really, doesn't have an effect on the sidechain. So you don't, since it's just kind of generating MIDI data, it's not going to do that. But the sound coming from the instrument that's generating the arpeggios from Arpache can be sidechained. Let's see. I'm sorry. Let me turn my phone off real quick and then call. I'm going to blow off Peter Frampton for you guys. So bear with me. I have to call him back after the hangout. All right. Okay. Okay, so let's see a question. A few weeks ago, you said the craziest stuff you ever seen with Cubase was someone running two instances together. Was that just slaving to MIDI or piping audio and plugins through one another? I think I was talking about Donny Osmond's setup. So he had, and Donnie's incredibly technical, but he had two kind of duplicate systems. And for like 10 years, he never had one dropout with his Cubase rigs, but he had two of them synced together just in case one machine, had a hard drive crash or something. But he had other machines that were 4 other versions of Cubase that were synced via MIDI timecode that were playing back all the on-screen video. He had his own Q mixes set up with different reminders for choreography. He had the lights set up. He also had the front of house mix console automated in Cubase, and he could set up, have it set up to loop different sections of the show when they would do conversations and bring people up from the audience. So that was a pretty elaborate setup that, you don't necessarily think of Donny Osmond as being super technical, but he is. He's a real kind of, gets into the very granular levels of everything and set everything up himself. So he's a very, very astute technical guy. So that was a pretty clever setup he did. So. Okay, so it's a question. Hello, the templates you can save also in predefined sections and not only in more. Yeah, you can save the templates to different areas. That's a good point. Thank you. Okay. Okay, good to see Nick on the Hangout. I'm glad to help you out the other day with this audio pre-record. So Zach Krikorian, good to see you, Zach. Is there any way in Groove Agent to switch from audience perspective to drummer perspective in the drum kits? We'll notice that different drum kits will have different perspectives. So, it's kind of the age-old dilemma. So I think I haven't tried the new, there's a new library that was released. I haven't had a chance to kind of dabble in it yet, but I think like the Simon Phillips is different than the default. So it really kind of depends on when you get into like the acoustic agent, what the person intending to do that, wanted to do. I know some people will adjust take it to multiple outputs and kind of adjust it there. But, so if you wanted to do that, but it's really kind of the intention of what the, what the sample is. But let's go ahead and just take a quick look at it. Good to see you on the Hangout, Zach. If it's the same Zach Krikorian, used to work at tech support for us way back when. So let me just load this up quickly here. So I'll just see what the kit is and how it is labeled here. So it could really depend. I know sometimes you could, take and adjust the panning, but some of them may be fed into overheads. So you could adjust the panning kind of there within the mixer. So, but give that a try and see if that kind of does a trick for you in the built-in mixer. Okay, so I see a question, how to get audio loops. So when you get Cubase, you get like lots of great content with it, and you could just kind of, if you go over to the MediaBay on the right-hand side, you could just see kind of loops, and these are some of the libraries that come with it. There's also additional ones you could buy as add-on purchases, but there's, lots of fantastic content available in loops. Okay, so I have a question. Hello, Greg. In your audio connections window, you have multiple hardware devices. I've been making separate configs for each device. Should I just have all devices visible in one configuration? So in my audio connections window, I just have, when I come here and just reread it one more time. So I have one single audio device. I may have some set up here, and I'm just kind of using a simple, like 2 in, 2 out interface. So, but I'm kind of using so I'm running one single device, but I could, depending on your inputs and outputs. And it says I've been making separate configs for each device. I just have all devices visible in one config. I think you're only going to, depending on how you have it set up, you could only kind of access your device. So, if you have this set up for control room you could say presets for inputs, outputs, and for your control room. So once you kind of have that set up, but I'm only doing it at one single device. Okay. All right. So it says, hi, Greg. It's Pri. Good to see you, Pri. I haven't talked to you in a while. I recorded an external synth into Cubase. I could see the MIDI, but it would not play, nor would it convert to audio. What happens? Make sure that when you do that, I think if memory serves right, you had the old kind of computer in a keyboard, the Open Labs. Make sure, just out of curiosity, that when you do record the MIDI data, check to make sure that it's going out to the right device. Sometimes on Windows, you may add a MIDI track and record data, and if you don't see it, then you may have to it could be going to like your Microsoft Wavetable synth. It could do stuff like that. It could also just be set up, for the wrong MIDI channel, and the MIDI channel is not going to the correct destination. If you go to if you're working with multiple devices and your audio interface, has available inputs and outputs, try just to run it as like an external instrument. So you could come here and say, okay, I have a montage, and this is connected into, inputs 1 and 2 of my audio interface. And then when I go to actually add a track, I could add an instrument, and then you'll see external plugins and say, okay, here's my montage. And Now, when you play, you'll be able to, hear the, you'll have the MIDI connection here, but you'll be able to have the audio from the montage be routed out. This would enable you to run it through, your Cubase effects and EQs, and then you could also render in place. It would have to happen in real time, but check just to make sure that your MIDI destination is going out to the same source. Okay. All right, so just saying, hey, can you import Logic and Logic Pro key commands? So we covered that a little earlier, but just in case you missed it, we'll do it very quickly. So go to your key commands and just load in Logic key commands from the presets right there. Okay. Okay, so royal greetings. I'm about to buy an iMac to run the upgrade version of Cubase 10.5. Which is the best buy? Try just, get as much RAM, as much processor as you can possibly get. That way your computer will just last longer for you. Okay, so I see it says, yesterday I launched Cubase LE and created an empty project at 120 beats per minute. I recorded a drum track and guitar, but the playback was way too slow, but I accidentally clicked something. I recorded guitar first. All right, so... So when you say the playback was way too slow, I wonder if there is perhaps a sample rate mismatch. So check to make sure that the sample rate is set. If you come here, you can go to your project setup or hit Shift plus S. And then in here, you could actually see the sample rate. Make sure that there wasn't like a sample rate change. And if it's, if the pitch had changed as well, it's probably going to be indicative of a sample rate change. But sometimes you may also just have changed the tempo. So sometimes you may have like the default tempo may be set to 120. And let's say if you had it set to 80 and then you kind of turned it on and off, that one mouse click there could change kind of your tempo assignments as you see. So look at those two things. Okay. Okay, so I see, how do I start the sampler track to play? So if I have, just to say I have my sampler track here and I drag this in. So that's going to make a new sample track here. And then all you have to do is just trigger it from MIDI in sequence. So it's going to need a MIDI message for it to initiate starting to play back the sample like a sampler. Otherwise, so that's kind of the benefit of this. And if you wanted to just play back a sample, you just load it as like an audio file on your project window and just have that. Okay, so it says, hello, Greg. In your audio connections window, you have multiple hardware devices. I've been making separate configs for each device. I just have all devices. I think we may have covered this a little earlier. I have 32 channels of I/O from the console and 66 channels I/O from the DigiFace. So we covered that. We just covered that a couple minutes ago. But I'm kind of running everything on one single audio interface. And that's going to be kind of the most reliable way to do it. Okay, so question, do you know if Steinberg is going to make a new version of the CC121, or is there an industry leading hardware solution for Cubase control? I haven't heard of any plans for the CC121. It's actually kind of made by, our colleagues at Yamaha in Japan, and we have a lot of input into product functions and design, so we could do that. But, it still works incredibly well. I mean, I just kind of got my studio all configured, and to me, I have my CC121 as my left hand, my mouse in my right hand, and my computer keyboard in the middle, and it still works so incredibly well, and it does so many things that other controllers don't do. So as I'm working, and I probably have changed my workflow maybe to accommodate this, that I'm working with the CC121 all these years. But I find that, I'm not mixing before I would do all my tracking and editing and then mixing. But personally, I find that I'm mixing as I'm tracking, as I'm editing. So I'm not to the point where I need to see 32 faders and do a hands-on mix, because it's pretty much 95% there. And I may do just minor tweaks with the single fader. But, you could use the CC121, and I know other people that use other MIDI fader boxes. I know a lot of people are using like iPad devices or the Icon series, the QCon or something. Seems to be quite popular for kind of like a Mackie protocol for having multiple faders. But, I've asked, and I will ask again for, I keep asking for like an 8-channel kind of, accompaniment piece to the CC121. So I think that would be handy, but I haven't heard of any plans for it. All right, so it says, question, I have a Groove Agent patch I'd like to do more in-depth work on. Is there a way to import the patch with all of its settings and samples into Halion full version? I think the Groove Agent in Halion will be kind of separate. I think it's based upon the same engine, but I don't think that there is a protocol to actually migrate the data back and forth between the two formats. So there's not a real easy way to do that, but I'll kind of pass that on as a suggestion, because I think like a lot of the instruments will be kind of almost subset versions of Halion, but Groove Agent might be a little different. So, but I'll pass that along. But there isn't like an easy way of kind of doing it, in other than kind of manually doing it. Okay, so just saying a comment. Hi, Greg. Just found your Cubase Advanced Mixing workshop on Sonic Scoop today. Great videos always. Yeah, that was a fun seminar I did in New York City about a year and a half ago. So that was a lot of fun to do. So, and people seem to like the video. That's kind of what, when I do a normal, like a Cubase presentation, that's kind of how it's laid out. So, but yeah, that was a lot of fun. Thanks for the kind words. Okay, so we have a little question or comment that create harmonies from chords function was another revelation. Maybe you'd like to show it for the people who don't know. I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but we'll try it again here. I have one project that's a little flaky when I have all of my streaming stuff set up. So let me see if I can get that open here. Okay, so one of the things that's really handy when we kind of tie in like chord tracks. So let's say if I want to come here and I have like a piano part and a vocal that are kind of the primary part. So if I want to double click, I could look at just my piano part in the bottom here. And let's say I want to look at it in Score Editor, so we could do this. And let me think is maybe much slower. Let me try a different tempo. Just find a tempo that makes sense for us. So if I have my piano part, what I could do if I have the MIDI, I could just kind of go to my project menu and I could say, let's get to the chord track, and I want to create chord symbols. I'll usually leave the top two checked, and now that will populate the chord track above. So we'll kind of blow that up so we can see it. Now, when I go into very audio editing, one of the things that's really helpful is to colorize based upon the chords. So if I go to the colors here, we can now just kind of see so and we'll just kind of listen to this in context. So I'm going to, right where she says, tell me why, just right here. I'll select that phrase and I'll just turn my snap off. And I'm just going to select that range. And because we know what the chords are derived from the MIDI piano part, I'm just going to go to my audio menu and we'll just have it give us 4 parts of harmony. And again, we saw earlier how we could discuss, change the voicings for each of those. So now we listen to it. So at that point, you could just have it generate harmonies for you automatically. So it's a great feature in Cubase. Okay. So question, thank you so much as always. Could you talk a bit about the different pitch and time shift algorithms, please, from Bristol, UK? Sure. There's kind of, we have kind of the original time stretch algorithms, and some of these are being used for time stretching, like when we do very audio, not only for the processing and detection, so we'll see solo mode that's used for that. And then there's kind of 3 different types within 3 families of elastique, and these are kind of the more probably sophisticated algorithms. So we could just have we see the Elastic Pro. We see Elastic Pro with formants, so that will preserve formants, which is helpful for vocals, so you don't get kind of the munchkinization of vocals. We also could have more efficient. So these 3 will do if you have like a really, really large project, like 200, 300 tracks, you may want to run the efficient mode. But usually it defaults to these 3 types. So we saw earlier that we have time, which we could think of as that's the default algorithm, and that's a great overall algorithm to use. But if you had like vocals, you may want to, or like a really dense harmonic part, you may want to switch that algorithm to pitch. And if you wanted to kind of mimic what an analog tape machine does, whereas we slow down the tempo, the pitch will change. Or speed it up, the pitch will change. So you could do kind of vary speed functions. That's what the tape algorithm does. So that's a quick overview of some of the different algorithms that you could use. Okay. Question, Greg. Hi. Do I have some space at the start of a track as regards to the metronome count-in? How can I set up my cursor marker to start on bar 1 each time? Thanks. So let's say if we come here to your project setup and hit Shift S. All right, my son's knocking on the door. Give me 1 second. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. So here we could actually have, a display bar offset. So you may have noticed that my measure started at 0. So if you wanted to do that, we could, just come here. Now I could have everything start at bar 1, or you could move everything to bar 1 or leave it in the same position. So there is... as regards to the metronome count in, how can I set up my cursor makes it to the start of bar 1. So, if you just, if you hit the 0 key on a numeric keypad, so let's say if we're here in time and I play, if I hit 0 once, it stops. So I hit it twice, it goes back to the original. If I hit it 3, or if I hit the period on a numeric keypad, that will take me back to the start of the project. So even if I'm fast forward it through here, if I just hit the period key on a numeric keypad after stopping, that'll take me right back to measure 1. So I can do that, and let's say I had the metronome on by hitting C. So if I hit stop and then play again, and then hit 0 on the numeric keypad, it stops. Hit it twice, it goes back. And then hit period, it goes back to the very beginning of the project. So those are, if you have a numeric keypad, that's like where my right hand is a lot of times for transport control. So try just hitting the period key. Okay. Let's just go through some. Thanks for all the great questions. If you've learned a tip or trick, please feel free to give a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. All right, so okay, so it says, hi, Greg. When I use external effect like wave Z noise, the latency is not compensated with other tracks. The track with Z noise plays late, but the other tracks play on right time. So I don't think, Z noise really isn't like necessarily an external effect. It's just a plugin. Sometimes when... Cubase generally will always kind of default to the delay compensation. It actually does kind of a measurement of your delay compensation. So I would just check, I think if you go to your VST plugin manager, and let's see if we extend this over. I say that I thought there was a way. I mean, one thing you can do to check what the latency is of a particular channel, if we go directly to the MixConsole, and let's say if I'm on this particular track, I will go, let's say, to the full screen MixConsole. And if you get to the upper right hand corner, there's this little thing, and you could have the channel latency visible. So if I go to this particular track and I start putting on inserts, you could see, and I'll just put on like a multi-band something, because there's usually could be a bit more heavy for latency. So as I would just add some this, so as we add different plugins, you'll see kind of the latency indicated here. So that should give you an idea what the latency would be with the Z noise. I've seen some plugins that don't report the values or may need an update to report the values. But generally, Cubase is, automatically does an analysis of it. Sometimes the plugins can report kind of a false latency. So I would check to see if you had the very latest versions, but it should automatically compensate and play back on time. So, and you could try it with other plugins, and as you do that, you know, Cubase will shift the playback, but check to see if there's an update for that particular plugin. And it could be just kind of a heavy plugin. And when you do that, also, just out of curiosity, since that can be, if you're running on a master bus, try toggling the constrained delay compensation and see if that makes a difference as well. Okay. Okay, thanks for all the great questions from everyone. Hope everyone's learning something. All right, so just see a comment. I think the UK is taking over the streams. We have people from all over the world, but it's always great to see people from different parts. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. While on MIDI clock, I can't get my Beatstep Pro to sync to Cubase. Any ideas? You know, usually it's, you know, making sure that you have, you know, we could have Cubase send out, you know, MIDI clock, but if the device isn't responding to that, you could also, some devices may respond better to, if I go to the correct menu option, that would be helpful. So, you know, you could also try sending MIDI timecode out to it as well and see if that helps. But same principle, but, you know, Cubase will just kind of send that out, and then you should be, you know, your other devices should be able to sync to it pretty easily. Okay. Okay, just going through some more questions. Okay, so we see, hi Greg, is it possible to automate MIDI insert plugins with MIDI controllers, for example, the LFO? So let's see if that'll show up. So if I come over here, I'm not sure if we could do it that way, but we'll give it a try. So let's come over here and say on my guitar track, I wanted to have my MIDI inserts. So I'll set an auto LFO, and I'll just do another plugin to say MIDI echo. So I think if we come over here to your studio setup and we go to a generic remote, we could say we want to go to, let's say, our VST mixer. Okay, so just looking over here, so you see insert one, edit. So I see we could kind of turn it on and off or enable it, but let's see if we could actually maybe adjust. I may have to play around with this offline a little bit. Let me just try. Yeah, so I don't know a way to do it off the top of my head, but I'll play around with it. If you want to email me, just to send me a reminder at clubcubase@steinberg.de. That'd be helpful. Okay. Okay, so it says for string instruments in Halion, how to control dynamics and expression control to make sound disappear completely but gradually. Can't achieve this. Can't achieve it in Iconica. Steinberg support couldn't help. So let's give it a try. Okay, so let's go over here. Let's go to the edit page and just check, see if I. Just see if I switch any of my connections. Bear with me a second, sorry. Let me just see if I play real quickly here. Okay. I'll try just a different patch. I'll try a new project here. Sorry about that. I'll try one from HSO first. We just try opening up a project. It's already kind of set to this. Sorry about that. All right, so. So let's say if I wanted to go to this instance here. Okay, so here we could say, okay, I want modulation wheel. So it doesn't go all the way away. But let me see if I could just replace that with an Iconica strings. So when we go to our edit, you know, we could have kind of your different controllers. So here I have it set to modulation for the control. So and I'll just go ahead and make this a little louder for people here. So you may have to kind of, if you want it to go all the way away, you may have to control like MIDI volume. And let me see if I... So if I have one slider for my expression control, so that's CC, that's modulation, so CC1. And then I have a fader set for my MIDI volume. And that will take it to 0. So you should be able just to do MIDI volume messages to have that, and I'll just make sure. So it seems like when you do like MIDI CC7, you should be able to have that disappear completely. But if not, just let me know. You can email me, clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, going through some more comments. Okay, so seeing all these great conversations I don't get to necessarily be a part of. All right, so it's fun to read. Okay, sorry, just turning my phone off. Okay, it says I'm aligning 2 backup vocals to a lead vocal, but only in certain sections. I've also read that it's best to work on it 4 or 8 bar sections at a time anyway. How to do this? So let me jump back. Okay, so this is dealing with vocal aligning. So at times you may find it easier just to take little sections of audio, and you could do this through, just selecting, let's say, like the range tool, and say, I want to work on these particular parts. And then if we just come over here and say we want to split, so if you go to range, you could choose to just split, which is Shift X, and then that will make new parts for all those events. And then if you want to do like a bounce selection, you can now have kind of new, smaller audio files to deal with, so that timing issues from previous previous parts of it won't affect. But if we want to now at this point select this file and take just portions of other files, now that they're kind of broken into separate files, I could add that as a reference and then add these as my targets. And then we can see kind of visually that these will be off rhythmically, and then just choose to align the audio. But if you haven't really kind of seen, I'll just play this as an example for those who haven't worked with this. I'll make sure that I'm not going to kill you.
Somos iguales. Somos iguales.
So, if you have sections, you could say, I want this to be the reference file, and I want these files to be the targets, and just choose align audio. And now.
Somos iguales. Somos iguales.
So that could really help. So, you can make smaller selections if you want to. And, just grab the range tool and just do a render in place. And that way your original files will kind of always be intact as well. Okay, let's go. All right. Going through different comments. All right, so we have different people checking in. And I'm just also saying, tomorrow I just want to let everyone know that there's going to be a Spectral Layers hangout. So look for that. One of the other specialists is going to be doing just a dedicated Spectral Layers hangouts. So check that out tomorrow. You can see it on the Steinberg YouTube channel. Good to see Fred Nicholson on a hangout. All right. Okay. Okay, so just saying hello from Finland. I have a big problem with audio processing load when I open up, for example, Halion Sonic SE on some other VST instrument, Cubase 10.5 and Windows 10. One thing that you could do if you're having really large projects is as we open up different instruments, say if we go to our VST instruments, and we could have, is depending on how you want it to be split across multiple cores, so if I wanted to come here, I could just, sometimes an easier way to split cores is say, okay, I want to add multiple instrument tracks. So I can say instead of loading 4 different instrument sounds into Halion Sonic SE, which is easy, is to have one sound in 4 instances of Halion Sonic SE. And that way each instance can be spread across different processing cores more effectively. And it's just kind of how any DAW kind of works with, the VST instruments and plug-in processes. So if you're having processing load questions, try to run more instances with fewer sounds in it, and as opposed to fewer instances with more sounds in it. Okay. Okay, going through more comments and questions. Okay, so it's just going through. All right, and I know we had some questions that were mailed in. We'll get to some of those in just a minute. Okay, so we had a question. Can we generate a chord track from piano MIDI track? So we'll show you how to do this quickly. So if we have our chord track here, so say we have our piano part. And I may have done this already, so I'll just delete this particular track. So select the MIDI part, go to Project, to Chord Track, and choose Create Chord Symbols. And now this will automatically, I hit OK, and the chord symbols have been created directly onto our timeline. Sorry about the construction noise, if it could be bothersome, I'm sure, listening to it. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. I have a Cubase Elements 10.5 and an MPC 2000. If I set up MIDI channel or track 1 on the MPC and record a horn phrase, when I set up the MIDI channel on track 2, channel 1 is playing on channel 2. So it sounds like, certain devices may not be, I haven't worked with an MPC in, almost 28 years or so. It's been a long time, especially I haven't worked with an MPC 2000. I used to do a lot of work with MPC 60s in a day. But make sure that your MPC is in multi-timbral mode. A lot of MIDI devices can either transmit on one MIDI channel, or like for live performance, they may have everything only on one MIDI channel as opposed to being able to transmit 16 or more than one MIDI channel. So check to make sure in your MPC that it's actually set up to receive information on different tracks or on different MIDI channels, that it's in like a multi-timbral mode. So sometimes you could get into, and every hardware company can have different terminology where they stack multiple sounds together, like a combi patch or a combination patch, and that's usually when you're in that mode only on one MIDI channel, as opposed to like the individual sound. So make sure that you have your MPC 2000 set up to receive and generate MIDI data on multiple channels. Okay. Okay, so just seeing a question. Also, can chord track derive other recorded MIDI tracks as an accompaniment in Yamaha PSR9 instruments? I don't think the Yamaha PSR9 is going to respond to the chord track. I think it's going to be a limitation of the Yamaha PSR. Okay, so we have a question. In the MixConsole history, can I undo just the third one down, only to remove undo? So it's going to be a linear undo history because things can be really determined. It's kind of like, so it's going to be straight linear. So if you wanted to go back 6 steps, you can't just do the 6th step without undoing steps 1 through 5. Okay. Okay, so see, comment, would be great if the mixer history and project history were combined together so many times. Hit undo or hit my shortcut for project history in order to undo something somewhere and nothing happens. So when, Cubase first came out, that's when, it was a brand new, when Cubase SX came out, it was based on the Nuendo code base, and that's the first time that we had kind of the unlimited undos. And that was around 2001, 2002. And then just, within the last 3 or 4 years, they introduced the MixConsole history, and that became a lot more advanced over the years. So, I'm just happy that we could do both. All right, so we'll move on. Okay, so just saying a question: how do you delete a channel input on the on the mix console? So if we see like our input channels here, these will be just reflected on our audio connections. So if I go to my inputs here, I could see that. But if I switch this to just a stereo in as a preset, when we do that, it'll just automatically reflect there. So, but if you don't want to see your input channels, and if you have multiple input channels, it's, you know, not a bad thing. But we could go to your filter channel types, and we could just choose not to see input channels. We could filter those out from view. So it's gonna, if this is in the view in the channel filter channel types, we could see it. And again, that if you still don't want to see all the different ones, just go to your audio connections. And then if I added, you know, a bunch of mono inputs here, let's say we'll see my input list grow in the mix console accordingly. So that just reflects what we just did. So just make that back to one stereo, and then boom. So it's just kind of a direct correlation to what you have defined in the project. Okay. Okay, just jumped my timeline. Bear with me while I kind of get it back. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Bear with me just a second. If you have a minute, feel free to go ahead and, you know, give, if you've learned a tip or trick today, give a thumbs up to the video. And also, just if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that as well. Okay. Okay, just kind of going through different comments. There's great discussion going on. Okay, so it says another question. While creating in Cubase, I'm getting a weird thing happening when I start playback and while playing back tracks where the music falls out of sync. Somewhat, and then catches up. I haven't heard that. If I've never come across that where it's kind of playing out of sync. You know, it's, you know, if you're running multiple audio interfaces, and sometimes I see some people do it through like an ASIO for all, it could kind of drop sync like that. Because of clocking, but I haven't really come across where like the audio is and MIDI is kind of out of sync. All right, we see Taylor checking in from Pine Grove. Good to see Taylor in a hangout. Okay, it says, hi from Dallas. What's the difference between the lock option on a track versus selecting event and locking it from the top of the project window by specifying what elements to lock? Okay, so I think, you know, the difference is when we go to, you know, lock an event here. So let's just say I lock this, that, let me just find it for like an MIDI part here. So now if I lock different parameters, I think that this might be just for time. So I think that will just lock the position. And then when we go into your lock settings in here, let's just look at that. You could, you know, from the info line, you could specify exactly what components that you like that you want to be locked, whereas this will just kind of lock the position in time so that you can't, it's just kind of a quick and dirty way of doing it so that nothing could get moved accidentally on this particular track. But you could also specify that you don't want certain aspects locked. So okay. Can you show me how to do setup and expression pedal to trigger the wah wah insert? Let's see. There was like a little trick to this. Let me see if I can remember. Just go to the audio characteristics and let's go to. So if I come here, I want to say. So say slot 1 for my quick controls for this. Let me just see if I could find it quickly in here. I'll just do it on a new project here quickly. Sorry. So it won't interfere with other ones. So it looks like you could just kind of click here and just have expression drive the wah wah there. So I think that, and let's go ahead, just see if we can automate that quickly. I'll just try it with modulation. So I would give it a try just by setting your controller there and see. May have to. Yeah, let me see if I add a MIDI track to it. So maybe now we add a MIDI track and set the output to the wah. So I could play around with that. I remember that there was some kind of little odd trick to that. All right, I'm going to jump over some questions that were mailed in. I was able to reach out to a lot of the different people, but we'll see if there's some ones that I missed. And if you want to email questions in advance, you could send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, so there's hi Greg, I have a question for you. I'm trying to map Groove Agent, Acoustic Agent to match MIDI output from Arturia Spark VST, but I end up with multiple trigger notes for each pad. Be nice if there was an option to clear all trigger notes from all pads and still keep the samples assigned. Is this possible? So let's take a quick look. So a lot of times when you have different pads, like with the acoustic agent, you may have a hi-hat, but it may respond to multiple notes. So if we, because you may have an open hi-hat, you may have like a choke hi-hat, like the pedal hitting the hi-hat. But if we come here, let's say we have our Groove Agent SE. Okay, so, and if I wanted this to actually respond to some different, let me just, so at this point, if I wanted this note to respond to different messages, I think if we just come here, you know, we could just come right over here and say, you know, if you wanted to edit learn trigger notes. So for each of the pads, try just to, you may have to unlock this little icon here, which can be subtle. So, you know, it's kind of, we'll maintain that, but click here, then right click, and then you could edit, learn, assign different pads. So as you would hit different MIDI notes, that it could just simply capture that. And I think that will do that will help you with that. All right, so we had a question. I'm using Cubase 10.5 stay-at-home package. After I perform a MIDI cycle recording, the resulting clip has hash marks on it. I assume this means that there are more than one take. How do I expand the track lanes? I seem to be missing this. So if we have just a MIDI track, and I'll just set this to not connected, and I will just do a quick recording. I'll just add some MIDI notes here. All right, and then I will stop recording. I'll do pass 2. All right, and then let's do, and this could change depending on like whether you want this to be on merge or new parts. So by default, it'll be set to new parts. So I'll just do this again. So I think this is probably what we want. So I'll just record. Okay, I will record a second pass. And this is basically going to be a part that's on top. I'll do one more just to kind of show. All right, so now we have all these different passes. So I think in Cubase Elements, when you come to the bottom, you need to just kind of select your different tracks here. So when you go to the bottom center, that would allow you to select different parts. And if we had split, you could say, you know, this one I want to take 1, and this one I want it, you know, take 3, and take 2 for that one. So you could do different stuff like that. So in other versions, like higher versions of Cubase, you'll have the option to show each of them in the lanes, but that doesn't work for MIDI parts in Elements. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Is there an option available to extend, lengthen the marker stems vertically down the page? I find the stems in Cubase 10.5 hard to get a hold of. So if we have markers, I'll add a marker track here. You know, so I'll just go ahead and drop some markers in. So, you know, you don't necessarily see it all like vertically handled. We also had a question earlier about how to colorize markers, but, you know, and as we want to make them a little bigger. So, you know, but something else that's also handy is if you type, I think if we type the description in, if it's hard to kind of grab the different parts, that you could now grab the marker based on the description that you type in. So if you just kind of click here to name the markers. So now each of the markers will be bigger for you to kind of grab and navigate around. So that's one technique that people use to kind of make it easier to grab the markers, especially when it's kind of zoomed in a little bit. Okay, it says I have a project a bit like Dark Side of the Moon where I want to be one continuous piece of music but with separate track numbers when I export it. Is this possible in Cubase 10.5 Pro? Also, another quickie. I recently installed some plugins that are different versions of VST 2.4 and 3. Both type appear in my VST instrument side window. I want to remove the VST 2.4 from the list. How? All right, so if we have like a big project, like one where you have songs kind of going from, like multiple songs in one project. And this is very common. I used to do this like when we synced sequencers to tape machines. In the old days, I would often have like one sequence that was for the whole reel tape, and that way I didn't have to do any offsets or anything like that. So let's say if I have, this is my, masterpiece that I want, and this is 3 or 4 songs. Let's say it's side 2, Dark Side of the Moon. And I wanted to be able to export these as individual files. So collectively, it's one entire side. So I will add a marker track, just like we did previously. And then I'm going to add cycle markers. So I will just grab kind of like my range tool and say this is song 1. So we'll start off with money, let's say. All right. And then it goes into us and them. I'm trying to remember the cycle of the albums, and song 3. And then, so we're adding cycle markers for each of these, and then okay, and we'll have our grand finale where we learn that there is no dark side of the moon. So I have and we'll have this as my arrangement. So now when I want to export, and if you wanted to have, different markers be different colors, I think we could do that as well. So if I wanted to have that marker, each marker set a slightly different color. Just to differentiate it. And these could also have the names of the songs on the markers. So again, just kind of naming it like we did before. All right, so now if I wanted to export each of these as individual files, I could go to my file menu to export audio mixdown. And then we choose our cycle markers. And now I could just have each of the cycle markers export the individual songs, even though they all live in the one arrangement. So it's very easy to work with. So the second question was how to get rid of VST 2.4 and VST 3 plugins if they both reside. So I think if we go to your studio to VST plugin manager, here we could actually see, so let's say we go to our VST instruments, you could see exactly which version of VST it is. So you could select that, and if you wanted to remove that from your list, you can make a new plugin collection, and then if once we do this, I could just say I wanted to, let's say, go to my default. I will duplicate. I'll click on the plus sign here. Let's copy the current one. So I'll just call this duplicate. And then, you could even see in here when you say, okay, I select that, and now I want to delete that plugin from that list. So that way you could only see your VST3 plugins and not your VST. So if you select it here, you'll see it show up directly in your list. So I'll just switch back to my default. So that's how you could kind of manage to not have VST 2.4 and 3 plugins going on at once. Okay, so we had a question. It says I'm using the Spectral Layer Elements as an ARA2 extension in Cubase Pro 10.5. If I select the editor for an audio event, the Spectral Layers will make edits. Everything is fine, but then I change the editor back to the standard audio one. Those edits disappear. And we touched on this a bit earlier. And again, you could maybe check out the Spectral Layers Hangout tomorrow. But if we have an audio loop in our project and we've done spectral layer, spectral editing on it through the extensions. So say I just wanted to start erasing particular frequencies here. We could also just kind of make this a little larger. So say I want to go to my 3D view, and now I wanted to just erase those particular selections that you would probably need to, and I'll play around with this a little more, but probably need to come over here. You could close the editor and just choose to bounce the selection, and that would basically embed the selection. And now you could go back to your other editor and have everything kind of back to where you are. So, but you could definitely check out the Hangout tomorrow. Okay, so we had just a question on different ways of using the notepad in our project. So if I wanted to come here, one of the cool things you could do is actually type notes. I used this microphone. It was 4 inches off access of the guitar cabinet. On the snare, I used this. And we could have these various notes. We could also have project notes. So if we go to our notepad here, you could have entire project notes. And a lot of times I find this a great place to have the lyrics for a particular song. So you could have all the lyrics kind of laid out for you in songs, and just being able to keep track of different elements. And then if you wanted to pass on the notes to someone else, you could just simply export the notepad data, and that will generate a text file for you. Okay, so let's move on. So question, I was trying to play guitar voicings through the chord pads, and I was not able to find power chords in the available inversions or chord modes. Is there any way that can be done? And we discussed this on a lot of different Hangouts, but I think that technically a power chord isn't 3 different tones. So it's more of technically a double stop as opposed to technically a chord, which is why you may not see it listed. But I'll pass that feedback on again to the developer. Okay, so it says the classic and eternal issue, wave changing time stretch in Pro 10.5. Wondering if you could show this again. Okay, so you could use audio process, use a tempo field and a transport, and set all of them to musical mode. It says, I've seen you do by grabbing the right corner and dragging the wave file. I can't make it work. So how can we do a time stretch on an audio file that way? So there's 3 different sizing modes from our object selection tool. And we could just hit the number 1 key on the QWERTY keyboard, and that will switch. But if we go to sizing applies time stretch, and I say, I want this wave file to start there, but I want it to end right here, I could just, once I'm in that mode and I stretch this out, that will just automatically time compress the file to fit within that amount of space. So just grab the bottom right-hand corner, but make sure that you're in sizing applies time stretch. So you could do normal sizing, which can truncate. And if I turn my my snap off, we could just truncate, or we could also do a sizing moves contents. So if I want the beginning of this file to fall kind of at different points in time, or the end, we could just reposition that, or doing the time stretch options. Okay. Okay, we had a question. When I import a WAV file and then look in the pool window, tempo shows a different tempo than it really is. What does that depend on? Does Cubase make a calculated estimate? However, in my case, it always seems to show approximately 120. If I choose another who I know is slower, is that strange nearly the same tempo detect Cubase? Now, I have not investigated to 100%, but I think some of my mixdown files, in the export menu, there is a box insert tempo definition, but it's grayed out. So generally, like as you record audio in, so let's say I have an audio file in my Cubase project, and sometimes if you're just doing audio, people may not be so cognizant of tempos. And right now, I'll add an audio track, and I'll just give it a name, and let's say I'm going to have this be 80 beats a minute, and I'm going to change my tempo here to 80. So as I record, I'll just do a quick recording there. And let's say I add another audio track, and I want to call this 100. And I'm going to just set my tempo here to 100. I had the tempo, I'm going to turn that off. So I'm going to set my tempo to 100 here. All right, so as I do this now, the tempo stamp is going to be based. All right, so I'll have that as one. So say I would just change that value to 100. So when I go into my audio pool, we can see that it's basically going to be all the tempo information that the tempo was at in Cubase. So if you didn't necessarily record something that was like locked to the metronome, what you could do if you wanted to do that afterwards is, if you kind of know what the original tempo was, but you could also do a tempo detection. And if you choose to if you select a file and go to your project menu and do a tempo detection, that can do a great job of kind of figuring out what your tempo is of that file. So if it figures out that the tempo is slightly fluctuating and you wanted to embed that tempo information, those tempo changes or what the tempo is into the file that is maybe wrong, we could just kind of come over here and go to audio, to advanced, and set definition from tempo. And that will automatically embed the detected tempo into the file. So when you drop it in, put it into musical mode, it'll work very well. So give that a try, and I think that will help you out. Okay, let's get through a couple more questions that were sent in. Okay, it says, when I add a group track or effects track, immediately a horizontal volume line appears. I don't want it there, so I quickly draw random automation, then undo with Control Z, then the line disappears. It seems to be a bug or illogical to me. I really don't want it there, so is there a way to prevent it from being drawn there every time I create a group or effects track? I don't want to accidentally move it and stay in control of my volumes, etc. So I'll just do a new project here. And thanks for all the great questions from everyone. So let's say I added 8 audio tracks, and I will, now let's add a group track. Okay, so this is the line that the question is kind of referring to. So when you do that, so you can have audio tracks and, you know, all their, you know, there's data that's in an audio track. So if I kind of come here, you know, we could see that. But when there's no actual data that goes through a group, or there's no actual data that resides on a group or an effects channel. So when you're here, you can't actually, I guess you can adjust the lines, but when you come here, what you can do is just, you know, if we see our group channel here, we see that that will automatically be kind of carried over. So if you wanted to just place your group channel, so it's going to show up there, and I understand why it could be a little disconcerting. But I think, let's see if we, what happens if we just put this into read. That, hang on 1 second, my son's knocking on the door. All right, sorry about that. All right, so let's see if there's a way maybe to lock this. So it looks like if you click on the lock, that line goes away. So give that a try and see if that is, you know, I think that it may still be there, you know, and I don't anticipate a change to that. But try to, when you add a group track or an effects track, just to lock it and see if that makes it less annoying. So you see, can we please have the erase tool to instantly erase on touch of a note, part, etc., without the need to circle a box and then clicking again? It's an unnecessary click every time. You know, to make it faster and more intuitive to erase notes in one complete key editor arrangements or parts on the range view. So I think that's how it works. I'll just add a quick MIDI track just to verify, but I'm really pretty certain that's how it kind of works. So I will just come in here and let's just draw in some lovely notes. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that. All right. So I have different MIDI notes in. So I'm going to just select my eraser tool. and then just clicking on notes directly. That's erasing them. If I wanted to come to my project window, I don't have to draw circles around different parts. So I will just kind of split and just grab my eraser tool and directly erase right there without having to do circles, or if I want to erase that part. So I'm not sure, that seems to work as expected on my end. Okay, so let's go back to the live feed. Thanks everyone for great questions. Okay, so I'm just seeing a question. Will Cubase 10.5 work with Windows 7 Professional? I know a lot of people are still running Windows 7 for Cubase 10.5. I don't think it's officially supported. It's not necessarily supported by Microsoft anymore. So, but I think people are still running it. So question, is there a way to append a profile manager with another one or merge the two of them? I think they still function independently. And I think we touched on this in maybe the last or a recent hangout, where they're going to be kind of saved independently. But what you could do is to duplicate and choose to rename different ones. So we'll see how that goes. Okay. All right, so let me move on. Thanks again for wonderful questions. We'll be wrapping up in just a couple minutes. We'll see if we can get some more questions in. Okay, we have a question. Any idea why my expression maps with Kontakt instruments no longer work correctly since upgrading to Cubase 10.5? Switches mid-track or just stops playing? I haven't heard of that being an issue with Kontakt instruments. Were they maybe... If you could indicate if there are expression maps that you made yourself, or if there were in what libraries it was for. So, but I haven't heard that. Okay, so just see, hi Greg, any way to momentary freeze the tool number one so it won't keep on toggling between the options? So with 10.5, there was kind of an added function in the key commands. So if you go to your key commands, I think we search for object under the object selection tool. So let's go to tools. That you could have it set to go to particular. Okay, so if sorry, I was in the wrong menu. So let's go over here to tool. So here, if you set this object selection tool function, so if I just set this to no key command, and if I only wanted to always go to normal sizing, I could just put 1 there, and that way it won't toggle back and forth. So if I hit 1 now, it'll toggle back and forth. If I have the number 1 in this mode, it won't cycle through the different modes. So if you set it for a particular one in the key commands, and again, that's going to be under tool, object selection. So you could set it to a particular one so it won't cycle through the 3 different options, which is something I asked for a long time. Okay. Hi, Greg. Is it possible to make key command to for MIDI logical preset standard set double temp half tempo? So if you wanted to define your own key commands for MIDI logical editors functions, I think if we go look under P and you'll see process logical editor. And here, any of the project logical editor presets or project logic or I'm sorry, just logical editor. And you could also do this for project logical editor. But any of these logical editor presets that you've created and are on your system, you could assign key commands for. So if you find that you always want to, double tempo, half tempo, you do this like 1,000 times a day, just simply create a key command for the logical editor. And again, that's under process logical editor family. Okay. Okay, so you see, Greg, how do I save a snare sample I made into MediaBay so I can recall it? So anytime that you would have, let me just jump to project. I could just come right over here. Let me just... I'll just select, I'll just take my snap off, or I'll activate this project. So if I have one particular sample that I want, so I'll just zoom in here. So if I have just a recording, I'm going to take my snap off by hitting J and say I want that snare hit. I could just come right over here and I will just go to audio. I could bounce selection, replace the event. We could give it a name. But once it's an audio file, we can go directly, to our MediaBay. And you could just go to your file browser and look for that particular sound, that snare sample anywhere and drop it in like any other audio file or sample. Okay, going through more questions. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so you say how to duplicate audio tracks so it makes duplicates of the events. Typically, the events are the same files as in the original track. If you wanted to duplicate an audio track, so let's say I have this bass part here. If you select the track, right-click, and choose to duplicate track, you could do it like that. If you wanted to duplicate the track without the actual part, I think it's a project logical editor preset. So if we come over here and go to our project logical editor presets, we could think under tracks, we can, or it's a macro you could make. I'm sorry. If you go to edit, one of the included macros is duplicates selected tracks without data. So at that point, you could just duplicate with or without data quite easily. Okay, let's go through some more questions. Okay, so I see a question from Miller Brown. Comments like, Greg, what's going on at the top of your MixConsole window? Looks like a combination of meters and wave displays, but no grid lines or junk. I can't make mine do that. So if I go to like my full MixConsole view, I'll just kind of come over here. So go right over here and you'll see this little setup window here. Or Windows layout. So you may have it kind of look like, I see a lot of people have it set up like that. Just activate a bunch of the goodness that you have here. So there's different meterings, notepads. You could have your And then this way, and then you could go to your racks and you could choose to activate all racks so that everything is visible. You could resize your meters. You could have your EQ view directly here. So the secret is just kind of going to your setup window layout and being able to just turn on all those different options that are available. Okay. Okay, so it says I have a little issue with macros. I created a macro for reversing an audio track. It works great, but every time I restart Cubase, the process plugin is missing and I have to replace it. So it should show up, any macros that I made. So, make sure, see if when you made your macro, if, it should show up in your key commands, and go to macros and make sure that it is set here. Once you create your macro, you may want to try just saving your overall key commands as a preset. So just come here and click save, and you could store a preset of that. And that should automatically recall, just in case you're starting from, a weird spot or something, that should stick with all of your macros that you've made. And then, your macros that you've created, you could access directly from the little macros drop out menu there. So give that a shot, Mark, and see if that works for you. Okay. And just saying a comment, I just want to stress how great Greg's style is in explaining Cubase to all of us. Big fan, watched tons of videos. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I hope it's helpful. All right. And yeah, Mark, I see I've never dared to ask a question, but that's why we do these things, just so we can get your questions answered and get the most out of your Cubase. So I see a comment or question. Hi, Greg. Can Cubase have a switch automatically mono track to stereo option like before in previous Cubase versions? So I think we've had a lot of discussion internally. I know I've had with different, with different planning teams. So I know the issue's been discussed. So, but I'm not a developer. So, and also just seeing with Mark's point about, I think he just said that he made the macro is just macro, just to process reverse audio, something that you could do also. I think if you go to your key commands and let's just type in reverse here. But I think if we just go to maybe under audio, let me just try from the beginning here real quick. But you maybe have just the ability here to, I think this is probably MIDI. Yeah, you could just assign under process, reverse. So you may not even have to make a macro, but just simply, assign that key command there. Okay, let's just go through. Okay, just reading through a couple more questions. Thanks for everyone for great questions. It's been a lot of fun. All right, we'll try to do one more. We've been going a long time, so okay, so I see when you copy MIDI events which use iterative quantize, not all the notes are copied. If note happens before grid won't copy, is there an option to fix this? I think there's maybe a preference. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Just see if I can find this one. I think that it would maybe show up under MIDI here. So try, I thought there was another preference, but try just using the split MIDI events and see if that makes a difference for you. But I thought there was another preference, but I'll see if I could look it up if you want to send me like kind of a brain cramp reminder email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, we'll just, so I just see people wanting to know what movie my son is watching. So I think he's watching the original Nutty Professor after Freaky Friday and something and Escape to Witch Mountain. So classic Disney today. All right. So, all right. See if I get one more quick question. Okay, so it just says, wondering when 32 plugin outputs in Groove Agent 5 can be used and how best to use it using two controllers. Well, it's not necessarily, like you could have, when we open up an instance of Groove Agent, I'll just show this, we can have, 128 pads. So we have, 8 banks of 16 pads. So, if you really wanted to have your 32 stereo outs so that, this could go out of its own pad, each of these could go out of its own stereo output. And we go over here, so that's when you could get, need a lot of flexibility for 32 stereo outputs into the mix engine. So, it's one of those things. It's like, apparently no one could actually submix. So it was the big cry from the market wanting 32 stereo outs from Groove Agent. So we gave it to them. All right. So we've gone about 3 hours and 40 minutes. I guess we'll wrap up so I could spend some time with my son and catch up. I have to give Peter Frampton a quick call back. So, and a couple of calls that came in. So, but I just want to thank everyone from all over the world that attended the Hangout. I hope that everyone has learned a tip or trick. If you learned something new, feel free to give it a thumbs up. Tomorrow, check out the Spectral Layers Hangout. So it's the first time that they're doing. I'm not going to be the one doing it, so I'll probably log in and try to watch it myself. Learn some tips and tricks from Mike. But so make sure that you tune in for that. We'll probably be doing another hangout on Friday, starting at 1 p.m. US Eastern during our kind of stay home era. We're trying to do 2 of these a week so that people can get the most out of their Cubase. I hope that, again, everyone's learned something new, found the Hangout helpful. And, please feel free to send, questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And I'd like to, once again, it's a thrill to me to be able to help people throughout the whole world. And it's really wonderful, and I'm glad I could share knowledge and maybe help you guys be creative. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I want everyone to stay safe and healthy, so we could all make some great music with Cubase, and we'll see you on Friday. Take care.